Hello, I am Frank Kane, and this is Frankly Speaking, the show in which we dig deep into the insights of some of the most important policymakers and business leaders in the region. Joining me today via Zoom is Mudassir Sheikha, the founder and chief executive of Careem, which has revolutionized mobility and delivery in the Middle East, as well as making him a very wealthy man when he sold it to Uber in 2019. Mr. Sheikha, welcome to Frankly Speaking.
Thanks for having me, Frank.
It's a pleasure. Mr. Sheikha, in the summer of last year, you said that recovery would come in 21. You had then shed about a third of your workforce because of the pandemic. Now we have a new variant, we have a spike in cases around the world, we have new lockdowns coming in. Tell me, what's your latest prognosis for a recovery this year for yourself and for the wider mobility industry?
So, Frank, from the depths of that crisis, we've actually recovered quite strongly. If you look at the mobility of people business, which moves people from point A to point B, we've grown 10x from that point. The mobility of things business, which is the delivery business, which didn't get impacted as much as the mobility of people business to begin with, that has grown 4x. And even our nascent Careem Pay business, which is the mobility of money, as we call it internally, has doubled in size. So the businesses have recovered strongly from that low point. And as we had projected earlier, we expect a full recovery to pre-pandemic levels by the end of the year.
By the end of 21, back to pre-pandemic levels?
That's correct.
Okay, well, that's encouraging, isn't it? Let me ask you about the relationship with Uber, because this happened in 2019. But do you sometimes lie awake at night having nightmares about being swallowed up by the big monster?
Not at all, Frank. The sentiment is we're much stronger as a result of being part of the Uber family, and we can actually do more with that support. And just keep in mind that we have an investor, a parent company now that is actually quite resourceful, not just from a funding standpoint, but more importantly, from a understanding and knowledge of many of the things that we're trying to do in this region. So we actually feel quite well supported, both financially and from a knowledge and support standpoint with having Uber as an investor. And as you remember from the way the deal was constructed, we have the right to remain independent. We get to keep the Careem brand. We get to keep the Careem culture, the Careem purpose, and run this business in a way that makes sense for the opportunities in this region.
Right. Dara Khosrowshahi, the CEO of Uber, said at the time of the deal, quote, "Working in parallel, our two platforms will be able to build upon the unique strengths of each." And I guess that's what you're talking about here, isn't it? But tell me, in essence, what is the difference now between Uber and Careem? Why would I choose to take an Uber taxi rather than a Careem taxi, or vice versa?
Yeah, seems like you haven't opened the Careem app in a while, Frank. When you open the Careem app now in a place like Dubai, it doesn't look anywhere close to a transportation app. It doesn't look anywhere close to what Uber offers in this region. The vision for Careem has been to become the super app in this region, meaning that this is the one-stop shop for all the things that you need for living your daily life in a simple and convenient way. So there's a lot more on the Careem app, and the identity, which may have looked a bit similar in 2019 between Careem and Uber, is very different now. Careem is a super app, whereas Uber's focus is more on mobility and trying to become the house of all mobility options.
Okay, so you are now a super app.
Yes, open the app and buy and see all the things you can do on the Careem app.
I open it every day because I use Careem every day, but I did see that. Let me go back to the acquisition, because, of course, you made hundreds of millions of dollars for Saudi investors in that acquisition. You had big Saudi backers, didn't you, when you sold Careem to Uber? But wouldn't you possibly have made a lot more if you had listed Careem on the Tadawul exchange in Riyadh?
Look, the decision of whether to continue and do an IPO versus become a part of the Uber family was considered carefully by the Careem board at that time. And at that time, it was determined that the Uber acquisition is the right way to go. And, of course, the shareholders, as you know, did quite well, as you pointed out. But for me personally and for Magnus and the team at Careem, it really was important to continue driving the Careem purpose forward. And we actually felt that in Uber, we found a partner that would help us and accelerate our journey towards our vision, towards our purpose. For the reasons that I mentioned earlier, they can support us with everything that they have done globally. They can support us with technology. They can support us with funding. And the discussion really came down to if we can remain independent and pursue this vision, then this is really the best outcome for both the shareholders who did decently well in the transaction and also for the Careem team that gets to continue driving this purpose forward.
I mentioned Saudi Arabia there, and you are very big in that market, of course, aren't you? Tell me about the opportunities and challenges as you see it in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
And I think opportunities are plenty, all of our markets. And frankly, COVID, while has been a tragedy on many dimensions, for digital adoption, it's actually been a big booster. So what has happened in Saudi, along with many other parts of the region, is more and more things are being done on digital platforms by people, just because they were forced to live a very, very different life. They were not able to do things in the traditional way before. So now you come to a digital platform and you basically find ways to do those things. So literally everything that people were doing in the offline world is starting to move online at a very rapid pace. And some of the enabling pieces that were coming in the way of that digital adoption, such as payments, because a lot of Saudi transactions were happening on cash, were very, very quickly flipped as a result of the pandemic as well, because there was a decree that was passed that you cannot use cash for deliveries, for paying for deliveries. And all of a sudden, everyone that had a bank account and had a debit card with it started using digital payment to pay for these goods. So a few other things happened along with the change in lifestyle that really has put the ball in motion for digital platforms to become a much integral and deeper part of the society. So from our perspective, to become a super app in Saudi means that we can actually start helping people, not just with mobility, but pretty much almost everything they need on their daily and weekly basis, whether it's food, whether it's groceries, whether it's pharmacies, paying bills, paying each other, home services. These are all services that people consume through various ways today, but they can be made available on the Careem app. And now society has embraced these digital platforms like never before.
Just last week, Mr. Shekhar, Saudi Arabia announced 20 plus companies had moved their regional headquarters to Riyadh. Might you be tempted at that prospect?
Look, Saudi is a very important and strategic market for us, and we have a large part of our workforce based in Saudi. So whether we are headquartered here or there, it is fair to say that we all spend a fair amount of our time in Saudi and make sure that it gets the attention it deserves as one of our largest and most strategic markets.
How has the Saudization of the workforce at Careem gone in the kingdom?
So the topic of Saudization for us, Frank, in Saudi has two dimensions to it. There's, of course, a dimension of our colleagues, people that work directly for Careem. And there's also a dimension of our captains. So on the colleague front, we were always quite well placed on this topic. But as you can imagine, 6-7 years ago, when we first started in Saudi, being a captain or being a driver was not something that Saudis were happy to do. This is not something that was seen as a respectable profession. But very quickly, as the economic hardships started happening, and we did a lot of work to make sure that this was seen as a respectable profession, calling them captains, making sure their earnings were given in a way that was acceptable. Started also educating customers on how to behave with these captains. That openness started happening. So that journey that started almost 4 years ago with us starting to onboard Saudis in our fleet as captains has now reached a point where 100% of our fleet in Saudi 100% of our captains in Saudi are Saudi.
100%.
100%. 100.
Okay. How interesting.
They've done really, really well. Remarkably well. Better than all expectations.
Right. I also remember when women were given the right to drive, that you made a big push to try and hire capitanas, didn't you? And I recall that. Tell me, how has that gone? What proportion of the driver force is female now?
Yeah, it's something that we would love to do a lot more on. We have a small percent of our fleet who are female captains in Saudi, and once in a while you will get a ride with them. I was in Jeddah before the pandemic, and I was picked up at the airport by a captina. So you get them once in a while if you are a regular user. But it's been hard to scale that program. And what we are seeing a little bit is, there are women who want to drive and be captinas, but there's still some acceptance and perception and the way that this is seen that needs to evolve before this starts becoming a little bit more widespread. And frankly, the society will evolve, and this at some point will become totally acceptable, and then you will see a lot more captinas in a fleet in Saudi, inshallah.
But that's a case of evolution, is it, rather than legislation or more reform? What do you think will give it a push?
It is a cultural and society construct at this point.
Okay. This week in the UAE, you announced quite a big news initiative, didn't you? Zero commission on food deliveries here. Now, is this a kind of declaration of war against other operators in this field? I mean, I'm thinking specifically of Noon, Mohammed Alabar, who, of course, are backed by the PIF of Saudi Arabia. Explain the rationale there, please.
The food delivery business in this region, Frank, has been is not in a healthy place. And what has happened in the last 9 months is the following. One, as we all know and can appreciate, the business has gone down significantly for restaurants. It's a meaningful decline as a result of the pandemic. And the second thing that's happened, that even the business that's left, a large percent of that business is happening on deliveries. And as we know, deliveries are largely done through aggregators, apps that aggregate multiple restaurants on their platform, and they charge anywhere from 20 to 30% commission to these restaurants. So all of a sudden, you have a restaurant that's not only lost a lot of their business, but the business that's left has much poorer economics than the business that they were doing before. So what's happened as a result of it? A lot of restaurants have gone under. They've not been able to survive. And second, what's happening as we speak is many restaurants are struggling serving delivery orders. When a restaurant gets a delivery order, yes, they're happy that there is business, but they're also not happy because this is not a profitable business for them. But they still won't accept this business because it just keeps the ball moving. So you basically have this industry which is not working for a very important stakeholder. And what happens when these things happen? Then you start getting relatively subpar experiences. We used to have a saying in the ride-hailing world: if you have an unhappy captain, you have an unhappy customer. Because if the captain is not happy with you, that captain is not going to deliver a great service to the customer, and the customer will not be happy. In the same way, if the restaurant is unhappy, then at some point or the other, the service delivery to the customer will suffer. So that's the context, right? That's where the industry is. And we've been in this business for the last year and a half. And while our commissions have been much lower than others in the market, we've been witnessing this firsthand. So what we're doing now is we're basically saying, look, we understand that this thing is not working for you. We understand that many of you restaurants have created your own technology platforms or have subcontracted with firms that can give you delivery capability, delivery platforms. But when you build these delivery platforms, you then need to operate these platforms. You need to market these platforms. And this is really not your expertise, right? You're not a tech firm. You're not a firm that knows how to do digital marketing well. So what we will do is that we will give you the ability to list on the Careem Super App in the form of a subscription. Forget about commission, forget about a high commission, pay a fixed subscription. which gives you a place on the Careem Super App, which means that now you have an ability to take digital orders through an app from your customers. And then in addition to that, we give you access to all of the customers that use the Careem Super App. There's 48 million customers in the region that have the Careem Super App, that have signed up to the Careem Super App. So not only are you getting the technology at a fixed subscription price, but you also get to target all of the customers that we have on the Careem Super App. So that's really what we're doing. This is not a shot at any one company here or there, but this is just to make sure that the business is sustainable for one of the most important stakeholders in this value chain, and to make sure that we have an offering that is competitive and delivers a responsible choice to customers.
But the competition has reacted by also reducing their charges, haven't they? So are we in a price war here?
So competition, one of our objectives is not just to make this a Careem thing, right? We do believe that we have to do the responsible thing and start nudging the industry in a more healthy place. So actually, the fact that competition is doing this as well, and frankly, the big competitors are still not doing it, right? You have the upstarts that are relatively small or not even present in the market. They're coming out with these things, but the big impact will happen when the industry leaders start following and start adopting similar measures to make the business sustainable. So we are actually quite excited that the industry starts moving in a place where it makes the business more sustainable for everyone. Because if the business is more sustainable for everyone, then customers will get more and more choice, because more and more restaurants will survive and the business will grow. Let's not think short term. Let's think mid to long term. There's huge opportunity ahead of us. If we try to maximize economics today, we will compromise and sacrifice economics and the long-term opportunity going forward.
Tell me, would you ever think of operating outside the Middle East? The success of Careem has been based in the region, hasn't it? Would you ever be tempted to move outside the region? Where's the furthest you would think of operating?
So currently we operate from Morocco to Pakistan. There are 15 countries in this footprint that we have a business in, and 100 plus cities, as you know. But what is maybe less clear is that in most of these 100 plus cities, we only operate our core business, which is a ride-hailing business. Now, there's a lot to be done to make sure that all the other offerings that we have in our pocket, whether it is food, whether it's groceries, whether it's pharmacies, whether it's bill payments, and the overall super app architecture that allows us to onboard third-party partners, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that all of these other things that we have incubated and built and launched in some of our markets find their way in all the other markets over the next year or two. So our current focus is to make sure that we go deeper in our existing countries, in our existing cities, than to go out and open even new countries and cities at this point.
Okay, there is far more to do in the existing market, I guess you're saying. Mr. Shaker, Careem is cool, isn't it? It has a cool image. But is it green? Are you simply increasing the number of cars on the road? And why haven't you moved towards electrified vehicles for your fleets?
So we've done a few things, Frank, and I'll tell you why we haven't done a lot more. But the few things that we've done is, if you look at our fleet in Dubai, more and more of the fleet has gone hybrid. So you will, like more often than not, if you order a business car in Dubai, you will get a hybrid car. And for many of our corporate customers who have expressed a desire to go more green, we have even created a category that allows them to only work with hybrid cars. So we've done that in Dubai. You also see us pretty big in micromobility. There are a lot of Careem bikes everywhere in Dubai. So we've done these things, and we've done similar initiatives in a few other countries as well. But at the moment, honestly, the bigger focus for us is affordability. As a result of the pandemic, many of our customers have suffered economic hardship, and we want to make sure that we are making our services as affordable as possible, so these customers can still continue to use our services. So instead of trying to go green at this point, we're basically saying, let's see how we can make our services affordable. If you're working with cars of a certain size, let's see if you can onboard smaller cars. Let's see if you can onboard cheaper cars. Let's see if you can increase the utilization of these cars so that the services can become cheaper. We have even started motorbike services in some of our countries where they make sense. So at the moment, given the COVID reality and the pandemic impact, we're trying to just keep our services affordable so that the customers that were using us before to simplify their lives can continue to use our services and don't find that disruption.
You also want to be a payment system, don't you, within your super app? This sounds to me like a complicated and expensive business to set up and to run. How far have you got on that?
So the funny thing about Careem and frankly building such businesses in emerging markets is you end up having to build a lot of the building blocks that our counterparts in other parts of the world take for granted. So to your question on payments, we already have a pretty large payments business within Careem. Because when we started Careem, we were able to work with some payment gateways to process customer payments. But as you know and I know, a lot of the business in the region happens on cash. And we have actually built a pretty extensive and sophisticated payment stack that allows us to accept cash from our captains that they accept from customers, and then make sure that the whole system works properly. And that technology stack that handles digital and cash payments works in the entire region. We have partnerships with the right banks, we have acquiring relationships, we have payment methods. So there is a fairly significant payment business already existing in Careem, just because there wasn't anything else that we could leverage and work with when we started the business. So what we're basically focused on now is how do we take this capability that we built for Careem and offer it to others in the ecosystem who are having similar challenges, scaling their businesses and working with all the digital and non-digital payment options that their customers want to use. So we're quite far along. We have extracted the stack. We have branded this thing called Careem Pay. If you open the Careem app in many parts of the region, you're actually able to do more things on the Careem Super App. So in Dubai, for example, you can pay money to someone, you can pay your bills, and there is a similar API available for merchants to use and start leveraging some of the Careem Pay capability that was powering the Careem business. So it's quite far along on the product development side. It's a question of how far we want to go and drive distribution of, and that's the current focus.
Okay, Mr. Shekhar, let me ask you finally, going back to Uber. How long will you stay behind the wheel at Careem? Isn't Mr. Khosrowshahi, really driving the car? When do you hand over the keys to him fully?
We're very early in the Careem journey, Frank, and when we started the business in 2012, there were a couple of incidents that got us to start the business, but the result was that we articulated what Careem's purpose or mission is, and that purpose is to simplify the lives of people in our region and build an awesome organization that inspires. And if you look at that purpose and see where we are against the realization of that purpose, you realize that we're still super early. We're maybe impacting the lives of a few million people on a daily basis, but for most of the people, we're only impacting their lives in one possible way. So there's a lot to be done to simplify the lives of people across all the aspects of lives that they need support with. And in that journey, we are still literally on day one. And what drives me and what drives the leadership team at Careem, who has all been part of this acquisition, have done decently well, is to make sure that we keep going, keep pushing to realize this purpose. And inshallah, this is year 8 of Careem, right? We've been 8 years into this business. Inshallah, when we look at this business 8 years from now or 16 years from now, we see the region being radically better as a result of Careem being around. So there's a lot to be done, and we are just getting started.
Okay, Mr. Shekhar, thank you very much indeed for your candid responses. It's been a pleasure to have you on Frankly Speaking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frank.